Hi.
Hello. Ray in this segment is discussing his take on a famous speculated passage, as I should say, a passage that's much speculated upon in the second epistle to the Thessalonians, the passage about the man of iniquity or the man of lawlessness. Ray says, I personally believe that this development, with its exaltation of human authority and concentration of such authority, is related to the Apostle Paul's expressions about the appearance of a man of lawlessness, as recorded in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 to 12. Of that man, he writes in the NIV, he opposes and exalts himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, and even sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Ray goes on, I see no reason to believe that the coming of this man predicts the appearance of one particular surpassingly lawless individual any more than the woman called Babylon refers to a particular woman. Nor do I believe that the fulfillment of the man of lawlessness is found in any one religious system. The term man here would seem to refer to a type of or archetype descriptive of all persons manifesting the characteristics of that type. Paul's expression about the coming of such a man is much like John's statement, you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, and that the man denying Jesus is the Christ, is the Antichrist. The context shows that John does not limit the term to any one individual, but applies it to all who fit the description. So, too, it would seem with the man of lawlessness.
There could be no greater lawlessness than that of attempting to infringe upon, even usurp, the position and authority of the sovereign God. And that is what the evidence shows religious men have done, not only in the past history, but in the present as well. Since the Father has vested all power and authority in Jesus Christ, and has ordered that all should honor the Son, even as they honor the Father, any attempt at occupying Christ's position and exercising the headship that rightfully pertains only to him would qualify as lawlessness of equally grave nature. In what way then can it be said of any doing this that they sit in the temple claiming to be God? The temple at Jerusalem was the symbolic dwelling place of God, the place where he dwelt among his people, presiding over them, giving his laws and responses to them. The Christian congregation since has become God's temple, his people among whom he dwells. The sitting in the temple by the man of lawlessness would apparently indicate his claiming the right to exercise divine authority in the Christian congregation, like that exercised by God in his temple in Jerusalem, acting as though he were the source from which authority proceeds.
Of his exalting himself over everything called God, and even claiming to be God, biblical scholar Barnes writes, quote, any claim of a dominion over conscience or any arrangement to set aside the divine laws and to render them nugatory, which Ray defines as inconsequential or inoperative, would correspond with what is implied in this description. It cannot be supposed, Barnes goes on to say, that anyone would openly claim to be superior to God, but the sense must be that the enactments and ordinances of the man of sin would pertain to the province in which God only can legislate, and that the ordinances made by him would be such as to render nugatory or inconsequential the divine laws by appointing others in their place. This does necessarily mean that he actually, in so many words, claimed to be God, but that he usurped the place of God and claimed the prerogatives of God. Now, in the footnote to that, Ray says, while Barnes would apply this identification primarily to the Catholic papacy, there is certainly reason to view the matter as a far broader application.
Okay. Ray goes on, the key issue is clearly that of authority and an arrogation of authority that rightly belongs only to God and his Son. Whenever men call upon others, whether openly or by implication, to accept their own word and their religious rulings, teachings, and rulings which are not clearly stated in Scripture, as if these came from God, and then they would surely seem to manifest the characteristics of the man of lawlessness. In 1980, while still a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, I had a conversation with a member of a branch committee exercising oversight of a major country of Europe. In the course of the conversation, he mentioned that he had once begun to prepare an article to submit for publication by the Watchtower on the subject of the history of the development of a hierarchy. He said that he got part way along and then decided to stop. When I asked why, he replied, "The similarity was too obvious." How obvious is the similarity? Is the modern-day organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, as claimed, a true mirror of the Christian congregation in apostolic times? Or is it instead a reflection of the developments of post-apostolic times, as seen in the historical records just discussed? Consider the pattern that the history of the organization centered around the Watchtower Society reveals.
We must say that in his reference to Barnes, which he spends a paragraph on, again, he's called biblical scholar, but remember, Barnes is a Presbyterian minister, so Barnes's way of dealing with this threat of authoritarianism within the church is not to say let's diminish leadership.
Yeah.
He doesn't get rid of clergy.
That's right. He doesn't paint the whole church with that same brush as if anyone who went with church structure was somehow the man of lawlessness.
You know, I'd have to say that this was a Protestant assumption for many centuries, that the papacy, if anybody did fulfill this prophecy about the man of lawlessness, it was the papacy in Rome, which after all is one man. So I don't follow Ray's reasoning on this, that it's like apocalypse, the woman is a symbol. No, the apocalypse is apocalyptic. Paul is speaking about a man of lawlessness.
Yeah.
The Antichrist, according to the early understanding of the church, the man of lawlessness, who they tend to equate with the Antichrist, was supposed to be one man, although it is true there are many Antichrists who are kind of shadowing that one man. But at the end, according to the early understanding of the church, and most conservative Christians today, there will be one man who epitomizes lawlessness, who will be an Antichrist because he will be a false Messiah. That's what the word Antichrist really means, is one who stands in for Christ. As indeed Ray acknowledges here by saying, well, when someone pretends to have the authority of Christ in the church, then we have to say he fulfills this description or this generalization about a man of lawlessness. So I follow him that far, but I'd have to say he's somewhat naive in thinking that somehow we can dispense with leadership as a whole.
In the church, yeah, because I get the impression that he talks about true fellowship, and I don't know if he ever did what he did in the way of Christian fellowship. I don't know if you know, but I don't really know what he did, but it's this idea that somehow a bunch of us could all get together and it would be all love and sweetness like the 60s, right? I think that's what the take is, that could exist, that somehow the church or fellowship, the body, could exist with no authority, nobody having a position of authority. And I just don't see how that would work. I think if you wanted to compare it to something, it's like a family. A family needs headship. It needs someone who is the head. I know that's rejected by a lot of people today too, but without it, you know, if you have an abusive person, either as a church leader or as a parent or a father in a family, that doesn't mean you negate the headship principle altogether.
No.
Just because there's somebody who's abusive, because it can be done in a way that's not abusive, and it can be done in an abusive way.
So abusive fathers or mothers do not negate the necessity of fathers or mothers, nor do abusive clergy negate the necessity of church leaders.
Yeah.
I think Ray is rather utopian, and that probably comes from the fact that he was never a family man, and his
Yeah.
experience in the Watchtower was as a missionary, and then as a kind of a corporate leader.
Because he talked about how anyone in a true fellowship would just be persuaded by words, and that's what I immediately thought. Has he ever been a parent? You know, like, you can try and persuade your child with wonderful, convincing words, but the most convincing ones are going to be viewed as tyrannical.
No, in any community, as in any secular community, there has to be minimal standards, and there has to be some form of accountability and
Yeah.
discipline. And I think that's what's missing from this wish. It's a very utopian wish, but I don't think it doesn't correspond to my knowledge of church or people.
Yeah, with no authority figures at all, I think it would be very difficult to find any discipline going on for anybody.
So that's Ray's last word in this chapter on centralized authority. So we can certainly concur with his conclusions about abuse, but not with the solution so far. In the next chapter, he takes up in chapter 4 the recurring pattern, in specifically from Russell's day to today in the development of these abuses within the Watchtower itself.
Okay.